want to thank everyone so much for joining us today for this webinar. I'm Tiffany from Six Red Marbles. I'll introduce myself a little better in a moment. We are here today to talk to you about Workforce Pell readiness with some strategies for where colleges might start to make a good impact as things shift and change in the world of higher ed. We are very thankful to the Chronicle of Higher Education for allowing us to host this webinar, and I'd love to introduce ourselves. I'll pass it to Jocelyn to say hello.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Wright. I'm our Director of Community and Market Development. I've been with Six Red for the past 6 years, and the bulk of that time has been with our Learning Experience Design department. And so I'm deeply familiar with, all of the different challenges that our clients have encountered throughout their course development journeys working on different projects with us. I've been spending a lot of time lately digging into Workforce Pell and what that means for different institutions. And Tiffany and I are super excited to share some of those insights with you all today.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And I'm Tiffany Chapman. I'm our Director of Communications here at Six Red Marbles. I've been here for 4 years. I've been teaching either full or part-time college and university courses since 2009. And I have also spent several years working as full-time and or volunteer in economic development, focusing on workforce. So we're glad to have you with us, and we hope to give you some good insights. Today's agenda is pretty simple. We're going to talk about why short-term credential programs need a response in the course design format, how workforce Pell requirements work through a course design lens, what programs might be a great fit and for which institution types, some practical first steps for wherever you are in the journey. And of course, we want to save time for Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and hear your insights as well. That said, please feel free to share questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. We will gladly respond to them throughout the presentation as the flow of the conversation allows, and we'd love to hear from you. So we're going to kick off with a poll. We want to know where your institution is in its short-term credential journey. Please go ahead and answer. If you need to add some other response, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll give you about a minute here to take a moment to answer the poll, and we'll talk through what we see in the results. And thank you so much again, everyone, for sharing where you're coming from. I'm excited to see folks from across the US, as well as I've seen Canada, I've seen South Africa. I'm hoping we have lots of representation all over that can use this information for the betterment of learners. Okay, and once the poll closes out here, we will see the responses so that everyone can see how to gauge everything across what you're doing, what everyone else is doing. It looks like there's a lot of folks in exploratory mode and folks assessing what programs might qualify. Those are the bulk of the responses. I'm excited to see that a nice amount of people have identified programs and are working on that alignment. And some folks have already worked on development. So that's very exciting to see. I love to know where you are so we can help guide the conversation to be meaningful for the room across the board. Thank you so much for responding to that. So I want to set the frame before Jocelyn drops her many realms of wisdom on us. There are two distinct conversations happening. So there's workforce aligned program design and workforce Pell eligibility. Let's look at the eligibility piece just a little bit first, and then we'll jump back into the program design. So with workforce Pell eligibility, there's a specific strategic decision with specific federal and state criteria. Some states have more criteria than others. Some states offer a very rote and direct guide, while others either say, look at the federal guidelines, or we need more nurses, or whatever the case may be in their own varying state languages. Pell dollars only flow into accredited institutions. However, there is this new window of competition where institutions might compete for similar programs, same partnerships with certain employers. I've seen this happen particularly in recent news with CVS having a need to drive for more pharmacy technicians. And they've tried to partner with multiple institutions and found conflict of interest because of institutional ties and things like that, where they've had to reroute how they partner. And the institutions then, of course, had to reroute how they partner as well. But it's something that there's only so many ways to partner and so many employers to partner with, and finding that balance is going to be interesting as Workforce Pell becomes more of a possibility to, have some supplemental and or replacement and or new funding for programs at, various universities and colleges. And then, of course, you have to build with everything in mind, right? The strongest eligibility position and the broadest learner audience at the same time. That's a lot. So when it comes for workforce aligned design, program design, there have to be, a certain set of principles in place for building a strong short-term program that aligns with the right rigor, has the right outcomes, make sure the learners are, wholly capable when they come out, and also getting a good experience and wanting to stick with their program and complete the certification, complete the degree, etc., so that it is a nice boost to enrollment. This applies to any workforce aligned credential, whether it's Pell eligible or not. And so when you're thinking about workforce alignment, it's more about how does this align with a future role, right? I have multiple degrees in English. I have only been an English professor for a small amount of time, but it really gave me a good leg up in becoming a communications director, right? So where do you go from there? How do you make all those alignments? That's another conversation. And I hope that you'll follow us in the future, because we do have some pieces coming out around the humanities that I'm very interested in and Jocelyn's very knowledgeable about. Sorry, I'm good at tangents. Okay, covering employee competency mapping, authentic assessment, stackable pathways, and outcomes evidence is also a really important part of workforce aligned program design. And you got to keep in mind that this is a broad application, right? That looks at kind of a broad student or learner journey and how they can feel ready for the workforce when they're completed, as opposed to the deliberate analysis that goes into Workforce Pell. So that's kind of the general overview, and I want to share a little bit on why it matters. So there are currently almost 2 million credentials sitting out on the market in the United States today from over 134,000 providers. It's a highly saturated segment in higher education and or continuing education, depending on how you frame it, how you look at who's giving out those credentials. Though this, it's a marketplace at the end of the day. And it's one that is highly competitive and has lots of options and opportunities all around. And then there has been, just in fall of 2025, outpacing associate and bachelor programs by quite a bit, a 6.6% growth in short-term credential enrollment. So this level of growth means that, credentialing is appealing in a time when there is, a tumultuous understanding of whether or not to go to college, how to go to college, when to go to college, et cetera. Again, other conversations that we know are very important, but the fact of the matter is this workforce alignment piece and the Workforce Pell Grant, there is an estimate that $3.2 billion in Workforce Pell is going to come out into investment for community colleges, universities that are accredited within the next 10 years. So that's an estimated 100,000 students a year that are going to receive awards by 2034. And the institutions who are ready and have everything aligned first or earliest are the ones who are going to be able to get the bulk of that share, right? So if that estimate holds true, the 3.2 billion, which is from the Department of Education as a projection over the next 10 years, then getting in on the ground floor is a smart move at this moment. I appreciate you listening to all that rambling about my 30,000 foot view of this thing. I want to pass it off to Jocelyn now to discuss a little more deeply about the Workforce Pell.
So today I want to look at Workforce Pell, thinking about it, the requirements through design lens. Now, anyone who's started to even remotely look at Workforce Pell has probably looked and been like, oh my gosh, there's so many boxes to check here. There's so many rules. There's so many things I have to comply with. And you're not wrong. it's a very stringent program with a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And I think a lot of institutions right now that I've spoken with are really asking, is it worth it? Is it really going to be worth my time to pursue this? But I'd like to kind of flip that script for this conversation a little bit and think more about Workforce Pell and these requirements as opportunities to really strengthen the design of your program, which matters a lot when you consider the hyper-saturated short-term credentials market, right? Prospective learners are basically drowning in options right now. And so really the way to differentiate short-term credentials going forward is going to be by showing how they meet these requirements and also by, showing how these requirements promote better design. So we're going to look at four kind of core areas right now that are, all pieces of the Workforce Pell. Again, kind of focusing more on what it means for a design perspective than the minutia of the rules. Not that those aren't important as well, but that's kind of a conversation for another day. So we'll look at employer alignment and how that's really an opportunity to revisit your learning architecture. Same with stackability, ensuring that the credentials connect to degree pathways is once again an opportunity to really look through your existing program and make sure that it's designed in a logical and coherent fashion. The earnings outcome tests, we'll talk about kind of how, thinking about it instead in terms of how can we change the assessments that we're using in the classroom and the different tasks that we're assigning to students so that they really map to real world objectives and actual job tasks. And then we'll also talk about the implications of the state and federal designations. So I'd like to dig into the employer alignment first, if you want to go on to the next slide there, Tiffany. And so how is employer alignment a learning architecture problem? Well, first of all, it requires gathering employer competencies and then mapping them directly to the program. So that's going to require attention to learning architecture. So, if you think about the best way to go about doing this, you've got to gather those competencies from employers. And there are a lot of different ways that this can be done. I think a very strong way to do it is if you have existing relationships with employers, in your institution's network already, direct communication with them, figuring out what it is that they're seeing or looking for on the job can really add an exceptionally strong dimension to the program, especially because you're already bringing in employers into the very beginning of the design of the program. There are also, kind of other ways to look at this. So there are various databases, aggregates of employer competencies that you can see for certain roles. A lot of these come from kind of meta-analysis of, hundreds of thousands of resumes. You can also look for companies that provide kind of labor market intelligence. So like Lightcast is one of those. Once you have those competencies, you'll be thinking about how can we map those to learning outcomes. From there, you'll follow the very near and dear to any ID heart backward design process. As you're designing the program, you want to make sure that you're gathering employer feedback, both, at that beginning competency area, but also as you're looking at the assessment design. And then, you don't want to just talk to employers once when you're making the program and then kind of move on, right? You want to make sure that you're periodically reaching out for additional feedback to make sure that you're staying on top of the changes in the job market. As we all know, there are a variety of factors, AI and others, that are really causing rapid changes in the types of skills that employers are looking for. So, I think that kind of continued connection to employers to promote that alignment is also going to make sure that the program kind of continues to prepare students to take that on. And of course, this also, positions students to place into the jobs that they need. This will support generating some of that outcomes data that the Do No Harm standard requires. Just generally should help to smooth the path for graduates onto the job market. So we can move on here, unless Tiffany, did you see anything like immediately related to employer alignment? I saw a couple of things coming through the chat, but
No, not yet.
Okay, all right. So we will move on to stackability, 2 out of 4. So, stackability means basically that the credentials that you create have to connect to degree pathways. So this is again immediately a learning architecture problem. It means you need to have a clear plan. You need to make sure that you're leveraging existing courses in the degree program, or that if you're creating other courses, that they all map to the same competencies so that learners are building towards the same objectives. And good learning architecture is absolutely critical there to ensure that students' learning is following a coherent narrative arc. And in addition to thinking through questions about, how these credentials will connect to degree pathways, another thing to really ask is credit versus clock hours. So really how you're measuring student workload, student completion. And I'm going to come out strongly in favor of credit hours here because they're just going to be easier to scale. So, since credit hours map to student workload, they're going to be a lot easier to use than clock hours for stackable credentials. Clock hours can work, but then you have to convert your clock hours to credit hours. And sometimes you can end up in situations where you have a fabulous looking amount of clock hours, but when you really try to connect them back to credit hours, it's a pretty underwhelming amount of credits that transfer over. So, when possible, I would really recommend thinking about it in terms of credit hours for these programs when you can. Throughout, you just want to make sure that these credentials are, stacking into a degree program, which means that they're going to need to follow a very intentional design arc. And I think we can move forward here. Let's see, what about connecting to a certification or credential rather than a degree program? I believe one of the requirements for Workforce Pell is that it does transfer back into a degree pathway. So that's why I was mentioning degrees. So the do no harm outcomes and do no harm as a design directive. So as I mentioned before, the program accountability metrics are very stringent. It can make you kind of wonder, understandably, if this is, kind of worth proceeding. We've got the value added earnings consideration. So making sure that the published tuition and fees does not exceed the value added earnings, which is going to be the difference between the adjusted median earnings of student completers and 150% of the US poverty guidelines for a single individual. There was a recent change that, this is only going to look at individuals who complete the program or working. So any individuals who are enrolled in additional education won't be calculated in. But, that does kind of bring in real questions about tuition. And the completion and employment rates are also pretty stringent. 70% of program participants must complete the program within 150% of the normal time to completion. And 70% of program completers must be employed during the second quarter after program exit. So, in terms of what this is going to mean from a design perspective, one of it is the same theme that I've been talking about, good, thoughtful, intentional design to make sure that the program is able to prepare students to, achieve these standards. But this also really means thinking about applied learning and authentic assessments, because really at the heart of Do No Harm is, the program has to have demonstrated career outcomes, and to support learners in achieving those career outcomes, having authentic assessments, opportunities for applied learning, assessment that reflects, kind of real world on the job tasks, inclusion of things like portfolios, anything that kind of produces tangible artifacts that show that learners really not only, kind of have the skills abstractly, but that they've actually done things that are very connected to what they would be doing on the job. And last but not least, we have our state and federal designations. So, here programs, this is going to vary tremendously depending on where you are, because a lot of this is being dictated at the state level. So, this is where this really comes in for individual institutions is you want to think about your strengths. What is your institution really good at? What are things that set you apart? And then thinking about how you can intentionally build on those in short-term credentials that will attract learners and be relevant to the job market is really going to be the best way for individual institutions to approach this question. And, if we look at some of the early grants, which I'll get to a little bit later when we talk about programs that are a good fit, you'll see that a lot of the programs that receive federal funding to create Workforce Pell aligned programming were really leveraging capabilities and capacities that were very unique to their institution and then building short-term credentials out from them. So it's really a moment to kind of reflect on your institution, its strength and capabilities, and really kind of what it has to bring to bear on the market. All right, I have been rambling a lot, so I'm going to stop for 1 second here and check in with a quick question that I would love for you all to answer in the chat. What is the biggest design challenge your institution is facing as it's building workforce aligned programs? Or, since many of you aren't quite there yet, thinking about what type of workforce aligned programming they might build. What are some of the biggest design challenges that you've encountered so far?
And while you're typing up your responses, I want to respond specifically. Chrissy asked a question. She said, and Jocelyn, please feel free to chime in. Can you please confirm the requirement for stackability into a degree pathway? My understanding is the opposite, that the ideal program is rapid completion to workforce. And the thing is, both are right in this very kind of different approach to completion. So workforce is like the design intent. It's the whole point of the program, but the program has to lead to a recognized post-secondary credential that is stackable to a higher level, et cetera. And then there's a key distinction that stackability is a requirement for how the credential is designed, not a requirement for what students do after completing it. That's something from my research notes as we were preparing this webinar. It's a hairy question and a very good one. And Jocelyn, if you have anything to add to it, please do. Otherwise, I do want to compile some of this research I did as we were preparing for this and send it out to this group after the webinar.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tiffany, you got it right there. And it is almost kind of intentionally confusing, or I don't know if it's intentionally confusing or not, but it is confusing. I think really the simplest way to think about it is that, yes, it is a short-term credential that's supposed to have an immediate boostable impact on a learner. You spend 6 weeks in this program, you get your promotion or, kind of whatever else. It has an immediate boost on your career, but that it's also an invitation to keep learning, and that it's an invitation to keep learning that already comes with some stakes or pathway in that invitation to keep learning. And by that, I mean, hey, you could have just completed this, 6-week program. You also now have enough credits to move into this advanced certificate, because advanced certificates do qualify, or, you're part of the way towards a degree in this specific field. So, I think one of the things that is at least, behind some of these regulations is making sure that these short-term credentials, don't just exist as credentials in and of themselves, but that they are leading students down a pathway both to better career outcomes and also to future learning.
And that said, we've gotten a bunch of really great responses in the chat. I'll share a few with you in case you have any notes. So the first one out of the box was how to balance serving existing liberal arts BA, BS students and new programs. I'm going to read you a couple more and then feel free to take the floor again. Facilitating how non-credit courses can be entered into financial aid systems. This note I think is really important because I think a lot of us are feeling it in different ways. 599 hours by 14 weeks is about 42 hours per week. Yes. Let's see. And then I'll also share this one. The requirement for a 70 cents 70% completer rate. I don't require a standard for students to enter the program. Do you want to speak to any of those? We have a bunch more. I'm happy to keep sharing. There's so many good messages here. If you haven't gone back and read what else is in the conversation, please do, everyone. I think this is a really great look at kind of a scope of where we all are with this process.
Yeah, no, these are great questions, and I think kind of doing the math on some of the time requirements is helpful to think about in terms of these are investments of time. And the completion rate, I mean, I think this does kind of bring into question a little bit, you want to attract as many students as possible, but then you also want to make sure that, you're bringing in students who are going to be capable of completing the program. I think that's something that institutions are going to just need to keep navigating. And we'll have to see how some of this stuff plays out. I mean, my 2 cents on some of this for what it's worth is even if you kind of look at Workforce Pell eligibility as like an aspirational goal, like even if you don't hit every single one of the requirements, or let's say your completion rate dips, first of all, if it dips once, I don't think you're immediately out. There's some kind of grace period, but a lot of the programs that are, that could serve Workforce Pell eligible learners, there are alternate funding streams and alternate kind of students who might be coming in who aren't necessarily Workforce Pell eligible, but who will also be interested in those programs. So, I would say even if some of these requirements seem like they might be a little challenging to hit, aspiring towards them and trying to get as close as you can to them will still kind of create a level and quality of program that I think will still help that credential stand out on the market, and we'll still have students who have kind of funding and motivation, whether that's from other federal funding sources or from employer funding. There are lots of kind of alternate streams of funding available. Let's see, anything else that stuck out to you, Tiffany, from the chat?
Something I'm so involved this question because I think that in case people haven't seen it, it's a good one to ask. Do others share concerns about private providers who offer more
Let's see,
flexible
Tiffany,
funding
I'm
and
having a tough time hearing you. I don't know if that's a me thing, but your voice got very
well,
quiet.
it was my mic yesterday too. I'm not sure. Let me go mute and unmute. Is this any better?
Yes, yes, you're perfect.
Okay, so Chrissy Collins says, do others share concerns about private providers who are far more flexible cropping up in response to Workforce Pell, leaving universities behind? And this is something that you and I discussed recently because it was like my first concern, thinking, okay, they're going to steal all this money. As of right now, only accredited college and university programs can receive Workforce Pell money. But I do, as my personal opinion, not that of Six Red Marbles, I do think there is a big possibility that that could become a shift in the legislation, that it could become something that's eligible for, say, unions or employers or, training facilities for certain industries that would take money away from colleges and universities. And I do worry about that.
I think kind of the biggest surprise initially was when that first round of federal grants went out for Workforce Pell aligned programming, and that happened so quickly. That was like less than a month, I think, that people had before the grant was announced, and then the window closed. But a number of four-year institutions jumped on this, and I think there was the assumption beforehand that this would really be a space for community colleges to build and expand their programming. And, what that first round of grants revealed is that, this is absolutely a space that, traditional four-year public and private universities are going after. So, I think you're right that there's just going to be an increasing competition in this space. Especially with some of the questions Tiffany was raising earlier that, are with kind of the changing enrollment cliff, and if all students are going to be going to college, is that's becoming a bigger question where that enrollment pipeline is coming from. All right. I see a heads up that we're halfway through, so Let's, for now, keep going and we can return to some of these questions. All right, so which programs represent a good fit? I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what's going to be a sure bet or a slam dunk where you are because so much of it depends on the individual institution. But I'm going to do my best to give you some guiding principles or questions that you can then consider that will hopefully point you in the right direction. So one of them is regional market demand. So you'll want to think about, where you're located, what regional employer demands are, and generally looking for roles with wage mobility. I think one of the things with the do no harm earning test is it's going to affect different institutions differently based on how much tuition they charge generally, and then how much tuition they're charging for their short-term credentials. But as a general rule of thumb, right, if you are preparing students for a career pathway that has greater wage mobility, it's more likely that there will be more wiggle room where you can charge higher tuition or you can charge your regular tuition and still have students, kind of pass that do no harm earning test. So that's, I think very important to think about. I talked already a little bit about institutional strengths, but building where your institution already has a unique or competitive edge. This is something where we already saw signals from that first round of federal funding. The institutions building short-term credentials off of well-established existing programs with unique research capabilities or labs or just things that not everybody had. Did particularly well. So, kind of thinking about existing employer partnerships, existing clinical sites or partnerships, specialized equipment, specialized faculty expertise in general. All of that is a great thing to help guide your decisions because you really want a differentiator that's going to make your institution the really logical choice to offer the credential. And I think that's going to matter, particularly in such a saturated market. That's going to lend some of that credibility and expertise. And this is, also TBD for everybody, right? But the likelihood of meeting the outcomes, right? So thinking and making sure that tuition won't outpace the salary bump that completers will receive. And, one of the ways to ensure against this is to train for kind of mid or higher skill roles, thinking about roles that have clear salary bands, things that will make that income bump more likely. And also, thinking about if it's leading into a pathway that's going to have kind of continual, opportunities for career advancement and outcomes that will also help with that do no harm earning standard. So I, on the next slide, do my best to give you some sense of where you might have a good bet. Now, this, is not going to be the best fit for everyone, but these are, certainly ones I think that could be worth exploring. And, early grant data indicates, is a good place to be looking. So healthcare, but beyond entry-level healthcare roles, advanced manufacturing and logistics, energy technology, cybersecurity, data analytics, AI, but only as industry specific. A broad, like how to AI certification is probably not the way to go, but if you tie it to a specific industry or role, that's going to have a much more strong likelihood of being successful. And also credentials that feed into the education pipeline. But again, kind of thinking about where you see regional and local needs where you're located is a really strong way to be thinking about what's going to be the best bet for you. So yeah, and Tiffany gave some great examples there. AI in healthcare administration, AI prompt engineer certification, things like that are going to be stronger AI bets. So we're coming up now on our last poll. Based on kind of what we've shared so far, I'm very curious if any of these seem like they might be a good fit for you, whether that's healthcare, health technology, advanced manufacturing or logistics, energy technology, or that cybersecurity, data analytics, AI applications. And I think
And it looks like a couple of our answers got left off the poll. That's okay. If you have something you'd like to share, please include it in the chat.
Or if you're exploring more than one, you also don't have the option to do that in the poll. So let us know in the chat, but this should give us some sense of what's looking popular.
And while folks answer, Jocelyn, we did have a good question. Why do you say healthcare but not entry level? I thought entry level is what workforce training is for, right? CNA, LPN, phlebotomy, etc. What are your thoughts there?
So that's really more thinking about earning potential for the role. Just making sure that what you are training for is going to outpace that kind of do no harm earning test. So it's more about the starting salary in those roles than the roles themselves. And so that's how I would think about it.
And then Jocelyn, you have an example of education pipeline programs.
I'm sorry, Tiffany, I lost you again.
Okay, let me mute and I hope this works. Can you provide an example of education pipeline programs?
Yeah, so things that will kind of feed into the education field that might not be exactly teacher certifications, but kind of other roles that are, kind of specialized and needed in the education sector.
It looks like the feedback is in. I hope you can all hear me, that there is a pretty even split between advanced manufacturing, logistics, and cybersecurity data AI. And then the highest is healthcare, health technology, with just a little bit in energy technology. There's also some really great responses in the chat, such as, multiple, we're participating in all areas, teaching assistant, etc. So lots of good feedback there. Really interesting to know what everybody's thinking about as far as how this might go.
Absolutely.
Shall we proceed?
Yes. We're coming up to the end here, and we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for any additional questions that people haven't been able to get through. But, kind of thinking about, first steps, if you're still exploring, it's going to look different, right? If you're still exploring where you might want to go, I'd really recommend looking at your regional labor market, looking at your programs, and really, don't necessarily assume you have to build something brand new. You might have a program that's 50% of the way there, maybe even 70 or 80% of the way there that just needs a few small tweaks. That's sometimes going to be a much better option to pursue than building something from scratch. So just kind of really think about what you already have and how you can build on that to connect to regional needs. If you have programs identified, it's time to start that employer outreach. You can really never start that too soon because employer alignment is such a critical part of these programs. Getting that outreach in place and kind of even starting to look at the state and federal requirements and kind of making sure that those things start getting into alignment so you don't run into any roadblocks is a good place to start. And if you're already designing, congratulations, good for you. You are ahead of the curve. You want to really make sure that what you are producing has that strong backing to track outcomes or to support outcomes tracking. So making sure that you have really strong assessment design, that you have an ability to kind of see whether these programs are kind of demonstrating the return on investment that you need to see. I don't believe institutions themselves are going to be responsible for collecting this data as part of Pell eligibility, but I would imagine most programs will want to be tracking their own data so that they kind of understand how they are doing before they get their report cards, so to speak. And with that, I will pass it over to Tiffany to wrap us up before the Q&A.
All right, before I jump into this slide, something I do want to say from my experience in the world of economic development, most colleges and universities do have some form of partnership with their local economic development council or organization through either a nonprofit or your city government. If you haven't already, as a department, in your college, your department, your school, etc., reached out to any of those types of spaces to talk about workforce in the local region, I very highly encourage it. These people are there to help with this exact sort of thing. They're highly knowledgeable in everything they do, for and with community institutions of colleges, universities, community colleges, etc. Is it doesn't cost anything, and they're highly knowledgeable. And I think a lot of people don't realize that's a really good resource for this sort of conversation. I did a lot of that work about a decade ago for a while, and it was so satisfying to help colleges and universities come up with, different pathways to help build jobs right in the local community and keep people there after they finish and give them a reason to finish the degree, et cetera, et cetera. That said, we know you already have strong programs in whatever iteration they're in, whether they're on ground, online, hybrid, workforce aligned or not. But great design builds agency for everybody whose programs want to maintain rigor, meet workforce standards and needs simultaneously, et cetera. And I want to let you know that this is something that we do. This is our, livelihood, is building great courses, content, programs for colleges and universities, and or taking what already exists and amping it up, right? We are offering to this group specifically a program diagnostic where we're going to send you an email afterwards with more information where you can sit down with our experts and learn more about how we might support you in your efforts to move forward with workforce alignment or workforce Pell readiness in general, and or any sort of, course design, program development, et cetera, that you need to prepare, focus on, et cetera. We are here for you. There are a couple of our clients in the chat that I've seen since we got in here, and I'm very thankful to have them with us today. We would love to continue this conversation. And before I move on to the question slide, speaking of continuing the conversation, Jocelyn and I recently put together a brand new offering at Six Red Marbles called the Credit Hour. It's hosted by Jocelyn. It is a community of practice. The goal is to get folks in the room of, like minds who want to talk about specific topics in higher ed. It is purely conversational. There's nothing about it that is specifically for or by Six Red Marbles. It's all about all of us working together to understand where higher ed is right now. And I'm going to put the link to that in the chat as we move into the questions if anybody would like to go check it out. I'm really excited about this new community of practice that Jocelyn's building, and I hope that some of you will consider joining some of the sessions for that. Before I pass it on to questions, Jocelyn, do you have any final words?
No, thank you for listening to me ramble, and I would love to see you at the credit hour. See you there.
With that, we'd love to ask if you have any questions.
See, one thing I've not seen yet is an actual existing program that would qualify. So that's a great question, Josh. Is there an actual program that currently exists that would qualify for Workforce Pell that people could use as a model or example? And I think the short answer, at least as far I'm not aware of anything off the tip of my tongue, just to be honest. I have a feeling, the full guidelines were just finalized like a week or two ago. So I think if anything right now, institutions might be looking at their short-term credentials such as they exist and seeing if anything looks like it has the potential to be eligible. But I don't know if there's anything right now. And Tiffany, someone's getting a locked out error on the link that you sent.
Let me grab the link as a copy paste to make sure I got the exact thing right. And regarding the question about when the first round of Workforce Pell is expected to be distributed, that is fall of 2026. So it's coming right up the walk. Okay, put this in the chat. I do see some folks are getting through. So if you are getting that locked out message, we had an issue with that recently where it was happening to certain types of Chrome browsers where they didn't have a specific update, and I'm really sorry about that. But if you want to check back later, it should work. It should work for you. I'm really sorry about that. That said, let's see. We also have a Workforce Pell guide that you guys will receive in the follow-up email. And do you have any other questions for us today that we can possibly help with? Oh, that's a good question, James. From what I've read, I do believe there is outcomes data as far as completion, but I don't see how a university would be able to track the income data of an alum. Jocelyn, what do you know about that one?
My understanding, and this is one of those things that has been shifting, is that, some of these things have to be like some of these things have to be set by the state, right? The state has to determine what the areas of need are for Workforce Pell. And so I think some of this data will be collected at the state and federal level, but to Tiffany's point, I think there's probably other stuff that um, related to completion would be on the university. So it does seem like it would be a joint effort. But that's, I think, one of the many things that's still being ironed out.
Yeah, and asking them doesn't, it's just like asking them to, do reviews, right? At the end of the course, who knows if they're going to actually complete it? And if they do, are they giving you the full info? It just seems like something that there needs to be some other way to track that shouldn't be a burden on universities and colleges unless they're given funding for that position, right? But that's again my personal opinion here. um, does anyone else have questions, comments, notes, anything else that we can do for you? Or would you like to get on with your day and go have a lovely Wednesday?
I am seeing if I can dig up the that first list of grants that went out for Workforce Pell Aligned programming, which might be um, the best I can give you all right now in terms of a like exemplar. These programs don't exist yet, but they are programs that have received significant federal funding to be created. So that might give some kind of sense of what these programs should look like.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. This was a great conversation. Nothing makes me happier than a webinar where people want to engage and discuss. And again, if you want to continue any conversations, our first topic at that credit hour community of practice is around AI and assessment and other things. So please consider joining us, and thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.